know what's funny? There's this moment when you're sitting alone at 3 in the morning and you realize the people who destroyed your name at the office party last Thursday are the same ones who smiled at you Friday morning. They didn't forget what they said. They didn't have a change of heart. They just needed something from you. And you gave it to them because you thought maybe, just maybe, if you proved yourself useful enough, they'd take back the poison they spread. But here's the thing that makes it all so delicious. They never planned to take it back. They needed you diminished so they could feel elevated. And they needed you compliant so you wouldn't fight back. The slander wasn't the mistake. Your response was, "This isn't special to you." Walk into any room where power shifts like sand, and you'll see the same theater playing out. Someone gets torn down in whispers and emails, and carefully worded concerns about their judgment, or their stability, or their commitment. The attack never comes from the front, because that would require courage. And these people are many things, but courageous isn't one of them. They build consensus first, turning your name into a question mark before you even know you're under examination. By the time you hear about it, the verdict's already been passed around like a secret everyone shares except you. And the beautiful part, the really gorgeous part, is that they make you grateful when they let you back in the room. They condition you to accept degradation as diplomacy. Most people think reputation damage is about truth. They think if they just explain themselves clearly enough, document their successes thoroughly enough, demonstrate their value loudly enough, the lies will collapse under the weight of evidence. So they build presentations. They collect testimonials. They work twice as hard to prove the whispers wrong, never understanding that the whispers were never about facts. Nobody checking whether you actually missed that deadline, or mishandled that account, or said that thing at the meeting. They're checking whether attacking you costs them anything. If it doesn't, if you just absorb it and keep smiling, then the whispers become the truth, because social reality isn't built on what happened, but on what the group agrees to believe happened. You can't fact-check your way out of a coordinated narrative. The mechanism is so simple it's almost boring. People need villains more than they need truth, because villains provide structure. If you're the problem, then they're not. If you're unstable, they're reasonable. If you're difficult, they're accommodating. Your diminishment becomes their virtue, and once that transaction is established, they'll protect it like their lives depend on it, because in a way their identities do. Every organization, every friend group, every family system needs someone to absorb the collective shadow. And if you're useful, if you're talented enough to be threatening, but vulnerable enough to be targeted, congratulations. They'll craft a version of you that serves their needs, and they'll repeat it until even you start wondering if maybe they're right. The slander sustains itself because it's functional, not factual. Here's what the world does with this pattern. It rewards the slanderers with influence and the slandered with isolation. The people who skillfully destroy reputations get promoted because they've demonstrated they understand how power actually works. They've shown they can manage narratives, build alliances, neutralize threats without leaving fingerprints. Meanwhile, the person they targeted either breaks down, proving the whispers right, or withdraws, which also proves the whispers right. The system doesn't punish reputation destruction, because the system is built on reputation destruction. Every hierarchy needs enforcement mechanisms, and character assassination is cheaper and cleaner than honest confrontation. So the ones who do it well, who turn your name into a cautionary tale while keeping their hands clean, they rise. And everyone watches and learns. The cost of not seeing this is you spend years trying to be good enough. You internalize the criticism. You modify yourself into something acceptable. You become smaller and quieter and more careful, thinking that if you just stop giving them ammunition, they'll stop firing. But they won't, because the ammunition was never your behavior. It was your existence in a space they wanted to control. You'll work yourself sick, trying to prove you're not what they said you were, and the sickness itself will become evidence that maybe you were unstable all along. You'll lose time you can't get back, contorting yourself into shapes that please people who were never going to be pleased. And the cruelest part is you'll call this growth. You'll tell yourself you learned to be more professional, more mature, more realistic, never recognizing that what you actually learned was how to participate in your own diminishment. Then one day you notice something. You're watching someone else get the treatment you got, and you see the whole machine in motion. The careful words, the concerned faces, the way information spreads in one direction, but accountability spreads in none. You see how the group moves as one organism, protecting itself from examination by focusing all attention on a single target. And you recognize that this wasn't personal, it was structural. They didn't slander you because of who you were. They slandered you because of what you represented: a challenge, a comparison, a reminder of their own compromises. The recognition doesn't make you feel better. It just makes you see clearly what was always there. From this point, two roads split in opposite directions. One road leads back into the game with new rules. You learn to slander first, to build alliances faster, to protect yourself by making sure someone else is always the target. You master the same mechanisms that were used against you, and you tell yourself this is strength. You become efficient at destruction and call it strategy. The other road leads somewhere they didn't expect. You stop trying to rehabilitate your name in systems that profit from keeping it damaged. You stop explaining. You stop defending. You stop participating in the transaction where your degradation fuels their elevation. You build different rooms with different rules, and you watch what happens when the people who needed you small suddenly need something from you. When they reach out friendly now, cooperative now, and you remember 3 a.m. when you sat alone and realized what they'd done. There's this line, you've probably heard it, where Nietzsche said, "Beware that when fighting monsters yourself, do not become a monster. And if you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss gazes also into you." But he got it backwards, or maybe just incomplete. The abyss was always gazing. The monsters were always there. The question was never whether you'd see them, but what you do once the seeing became impossible to avoid. Most people choose not to see, because seeing requires acknowledging that the world they believed in, the one where goodness gets rewarded and truth prevails, and people mean what they say, that world is a story for children. The real choice is whether you'll keep pretending the story is true, or whether you'll operate in the world as it actually exists. Because here's what they never calculated when they were passing around your name. Like currency systems built on diminishing, someone eventually run out of material. They've already said you're incompetent, unstable, difficult, unreliable. They've cycled through every variation of the story, where you're the liability, and they're the reasonable ones protecting everyone else. The narrative has an expiration date, and once you stop feeding it with reactions, with explanations, with desperate attempts to prove them wrong, it starts to decompose. The whispers continue for a while on momentum alone, but whispers need fresh evidence to stay alive. When you're not there making mistakes they can magnify, or showing weakness they can exploit, or providing new material they can reinterpret through their established lens, the story goes stale. And stale stories and social systems are dangerous because they make people ask questions they weren't asking before. Like, why are we still talking about someone who isn't here? Like, what does it say about us that we need to keep this narrative alive? The fear sets in when they realize the story was never about you at all. It was about maintaining a structure where certain people get to define reality for everyone else. And that structure just lost its most essential component, a cooperative victim. They start to notice things in your absence that they couldn't see when you were still playing defense. The projects that actually needed your work are falling apart or moving slower or producing worse results. And nobody wants to say it out loud because saying it contradicts the story they've all agreed to believe. Someone has to pick up the work you were doing, and that person discovers very quickly that maybe you weren't the problem after all. Maybe the problem was the impossible position you were put in, or the resources you were denied, or the credit you never got. But admitting that means admitting the slander was slander, which means admitting they participated in something ugly, which means confronting a version of themselves they've spent years avoiding. So instead they adjust. They find new explanations. The work was always difficult. The circumstances changed. Nobody could have succeeded in that situation. They revise history to protect their self-concept, But the revision creates a new problem. If the situation was impossible, then what they did to you was even worse than they thought. You weren't just wrongly accused. You were set up to fail and then punished for failing. The cognitive dissonance starts eating at the foundation of everything they told themselves about who they are. Then there's the practical fear that operates underneath the moral one. You're out there somewhere building something, and they don't know what it is, or who you're talking to, or what you're saying about them. The thing about maintaining power through reputation destruction is it only works if everyone stays in the same ecosystem. When you leave, you take information with you. You know how they operate. You've seen the mechanisms. You understand which of their successes were actually your work with their names attached. You know where the bodies are buried because you dug some of the graves before you realized what you were doing. And now you're beyond their reach, which means you're beyond their control, which means the story they tell about you might meet a competing story that you tell about them. They can't slander you into silence anymore because you're not asking them for anything. You're not trying to rehabilitate your reputation in their rooms. You're building different rooms, and maybe some of the people still trapped in their system are watching and wondering if there's an exit they didn't know existed. The fear is contagion. The fear is that your refusal to participate reveals participation was always optional. But the deepest fear, the one that wakes them up at 3 in the morning the way it used to wake you up, is the possibility that everything they built on your diminishment was built on sand. Their promotions, their influence, their reputation as someone who maintains standards and protects the team and makes tough calls. All of it required you to be what they said you were. If you weren't, if you were actually competent and stable and valuable, then what are they? They become people who destroyed someone useful because that person made them feel threatened. They become smaller than you were. And there's no way to undo it. They can't apologize without confirming the slander was a lie. They can't reach out without revealing they need something. They can't ignore you without wondering what you're doing, and whether it's bigger than what they're doing. So they're stuck in a prison of their own construction, maintaining a story that's starting to feel less like truth and more like the thing they have to keep believing, or else their entire identity collapses. Your absence isn't just an absence, it's a mirror, and what it reflects back is every compromise they made, every cruelty they justified, every time they chose comfort over courage. They wanted you small so they could feel big. Now you're gone and they just feel small. And here's the part that makes it all so beautifully chaotic. They'll eventually need to interact with whatever you've built. Maybe you're working with someone they want to work with. Maybe you've created something they need access to. Maybe someone they respect mentions you in a context that doesn't match the story, and suddenly they have to pretend the last 3 years didn't happen the way they happened. They have to act friendly, professional, like reasonable people who had reasonable disagreements with reasonable resolutions. They have to extend an olive branch from a position of weakness while pretending it's a position of strength. And you get to decide what happens next, not them. You. Because the power dynamic they spent so much energy establishing has reversed in your absence.